special operation, preferable U.S. President and our man Blinken. Russian President also shared his impressions from the recent interview to U.S. journalist Tucker Carlson. Moscow, February 21. Russian President Vladimir Putin told journalist Pavel Zarubin in an interview Western politicians were distorting his words about reasons behind the special military operation, which was triggered by Kiev's refusal to implement the Minsk agreements. He said that Russia should have started active actions in Ukraine earlier, described U.S. President Joe Biden as a preferable candidate for Russia and U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken as our man. Putin also shared his impressions from the recent interview to U.S. journalist Tucker Carlson. TASS summed up the main points of the president's interview. Reasons behind special operation. Putin accused Western leaders of twisting and distorting his remarks about reasons behind Russia's special operation. I have never said that the beginning of our special operation in Ukraine was due to the threat of NATO's attack on Russia. The president said he was referring to NATO's constant expansion and Kiev's plans to join it. Of course, we were concerned and we are still concerned by the possibility of Ukraine being dragged into NATO, because it would be a threat to our security. The complete refusal of today's Ukrainian authorities to implement the Minsk agreements was an actual trigger. The only thing we can regret is that we did not start our active actions earlier, believing that we were dealing with decent people. Interview to Tucker Carlson. It is a good fact that Western leaders have watched his interview to the U.S. journalist. It's good that they watch and listen to what I say. If we cannot be engaged in a direct dialogue now for some reasons associated with them, we should be grateful to Mr. Carlson for being able to do so through him as a mediator. Putin admitted that he was not fully satisfied by this interview, because he was getting ready to answer to pointed questions, but Carlson has chosen a different tactic. Putin believes that the arrest of U.S. journalist Tucker Carlson in the United States is theoretically possible. From the point of view of Carlson himself, it would be sad. I don't envy him, but it's his choice. He knew what he was going for. But from the point of view of making people around the world realize what a modern liberal democratic dictatorship is, which is vividly represented in today's U.S. ruling class, it would probably be a good thing. They would then show their true face. Preferable U.S. President. Russia is ready to work with any president of the United States, elected by the American people, but would rather prefer Joe Biden. He is more experienced and more predictable. He is an old-school politician. But we will work with any U.S. leader, elected by the people of America. During his personal meeting with Biden, Putin noticed no signs suggesting at the possibility of his incapacity. Yes, he was peeking at his notes from time to time, but, frankly speaking, I was peeking at mine as well. Reports of him banging his head on the helicopter while leaving it, but who didn't? Close public attention to incumbent U.S. President Joe Biden's health is a result of a heated election campaign in the country, but it would be incorrect for Russia to intervene into it. It's not the candidate's health that matters for Moscow, but their political approaches. I think that the incumbent administration's approach is most harmful and erroneous. Our man Blinken. In his earlier remarks, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken de facto admitted that Kiev and the adjacent territories were traditionally Russian, Putin said. From the look of it, Blinken is our man. But he should not make public statements of this kind. It may lead to his failure. Baerbock in responsibility of Germans. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is hostile not only to Russia, but to her own country as well. It is hard to imagine a state official of her level neglecting economic interests of her own country and her own people to such an extent. In his opinion, the Greens Party, of which Baerbock is a member, is exploiting popular fears, while conducting policies that are drastically different from campaign promises. Commenting on German media reports saying that Baerbock's grandfather was a Nazi, Putin said, "You cannot shift responsibility for what and his henchmen did, and not only in Germany, but in other parts of the world, Europe and so on to today's generation. I think that would be unfair. The ex-president is scrambling to come up with $450 million after the judgment in his fraud trial as the next case looms. Donald Trump was already reeling from multiple legal setbacks when a New York judge last week handed the former president a staggering defeat in his civil fraud case, ordering him to pay roughly $450 million to the state after finding him liable for conspiracy to manipulate his net worth. The decision by Justice Arthur Engoron capped a bad legal week for Trump, who had watched his lawyers attempt to get access to sealed filings in a classified documents case in Florida and then watched his lawyers lose their attempt to delay his first criminal trial in New York. There may be worse coming. The immediate priority for Trump's legal agenda remains, according to people familiar with the matter, figuring out how to come up with $450 million, a figure that includes prejudgment interest, or finding a company prepared to help him post bond within 30 days of when the court entered the judgment, so that he can appeal the penalty. Trump saw the ruling as a two-pronged stab at his personal identity. It is likely to almost entirely drain his accounts of cash, and it bars him from running the Trump Organization, the vehicle he used to attain his fame, for 3 years. President Joe Biden leaves a press conference at the White House on October 4, 2023. Donald Trump leaves a caucus night event in Las Vegas, Nevada, on February 8, 2024. Trump's preference is to avoid using his own money while he appeals, and his lawyers have contacted several companies to provide the bond, which essentially assures the state that Trump has the money to pay the judgment should he lose his challenge. To obtain the bond, Trump would first have to find a company willing to accept him. He would then have to pay a premium to the bond company and offer collateral, likely in the form of his most prized assets, which would accrue interest and fees. If the penalty is upheld on appeal, Trump will face a huge financial burden. In an interview under oath with the New York Attorney General's office last year, Trump said he had $400 million in cash and cash equivalents, though that figure could not be verified. A proportion of that figure comes from Trump's sales of 2 properties after he left the White House, as well as new ventures including a real estate branding deal in Oman. The deals were intended to give Trump a cash cushion in the event of a sudden financial setback. But even if Trump's $400 million claim was accurate, that would clearly be wiped out should the $450 million penalty be largely upheld. Adding to the total sum Trump must disgorge is an $83.3 million judgment entered against him last month after he lost the second defamation trial involving the writer E. Jean Carroll. That figure is not payable immediately, but it is another massive figure for which he has to account. Trump may ultimately find himself without enough of a cushion and face the need to mortgage or sell some of his properties. While Trump is not expected to go bankrupt, his total holdings are in the billions. It would mark a particularly humiliating moment for the former president. The legal woes extend beyond causing him financial pain. On Thursday, it was confirmed Trump would face trial in New York on charges that he falsified business records over hush money payments to a star to shield himself from bad press before the 2016 election. Jury selection in the case is now scheduled for March 25, despite a last-ditch attempt by Trump's lawyers to stave off the trial. Before the hearing to affirm the trial date, people involved in the situation said, Trump's advisors had retained some hope it might be delayed even if they believed it was the most politically advantageous case of all his 4 criminal indictments. If Trump must face a criminal case before the election in November, they would choose the hush money case because Trump may not face jail time even if he is convicted, an outcome that could desensitize voters to the other, federal criminal cases looming before him. But Trump may have to grapple with the fallout from another legal setback in Atlanta, after he and his co-defendants charged by the Fulton County District Attorney over his efforts to overturn the 2020 election struggled to argue she should be disqualified from bringing the case. The second day of the evidentiary hearing examining whether Fani Willis's romantic relationship with her top deputy, Nathan Wade, amounted to some sort of kickback scheme sufficient to generate a conflict of interest went sideways for the defendants. The defendants called Terrence Bradley, the former divorce lawyer for Wade, to testify that the relationship started before Willis hired Wade to work on the Trump case on November 1, 2021, in order to contradict Willis and Wade's testimony. The objective was to have Bradley contradict under oath the testimony of Willis and Wade, in order to make the case that they committed perjury and argue the presiding Fulton County Superior Judge, Scott McAfee, to discredit their testimony. But Bradley was a particularly reluctant witness and testified he had privileged information about when the relationship started, but not personal knowledge he obtained separate from him representing Wade. By the end of the day, it appeared uncertain whether the defendants had met their burden of proof to force Willis off and make the criminal charges in Georgia go away. Russia says NATO troops, disguised as mercenaries, control air defenses in Ukraine. The Russian military has made the accusation that NATO troops are actually manning and directly overseeing Ukraine's advanced anti-air defense systems which were provided by the West. The charge comes after weeks of the Kremlin saying that French mercenaries have been positioned in the city of Kharkiv, which sits across from Belgorod, a Russian border area subject of persistent mortar and rocket attacks. The statement was issued by a high-ranking Russian officer in a command post and was amplified in Russian state media, however wasn't stated directly as an official Defense Ministry press release, but is still significant. Military personnel from NATO countries, under the guise of mercenaries, operate air defense systems, multiple launch rocket systems, and tactical missile systems in Ukraine. Rudskoy said, NATO military personnel, under the guise of mercenaries, participate in hostilities. They control air defense systems, tactical missiles and multiple launch rocket systems, and are part of assault detachments. While no evidence was provided for the claim, it has been well known that Western advisors train the Ukrainians on these systems, likely in neighboring countries like Poland. MLRS and MRs have played a huge and crucial role on the battlefield. In 2022, it was even being reported that these weapons were tipping the scales in Ukraine's favor. The MLRS stands for Multiple Launch Rocket System and rapid fires several surface-to-surface missiles. It is highly mobile and must be operated by a crew of 3. 1 month ago, on January 21, Russia said it targeted French mercenaries during a long-range missile strike on the eastern Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. The Ukrainians at the time reported over a dozen civilian casualties, but rejected the claims of French fighters. The Russian Defense Ministry said at the time, on the evening of January 16, the armed forces of the Russian Federation carried out a precision strike on a temporary deployment point of foreign militants in the city of Kharkiv, the core of which were French mercenaries. Kremlin leaders, including President Putin, have frequently cast the war as one where the ultimate enemy is the United States, the UK, and all of NATO. Moscow has vowed to directly attack any foreign fighters or equipment found on the battlefield and will hold external nations responsible, according to repeat prior warnings.